Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with another episode of Total Breakdown. Today's battle is from the ongoing ESL 1v1 tournament Season 2, in which we'll see Onion Ease take his empire to battle against the Dwarfs led by Monster Orc. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content, and remember to check out our Discord by clicking on the link in the description below. On to the battle. The Empire comes in with Boris Todbringer in charge alongside an Amber Wizard. 2 units of Halberdiers ranked up to rank 2 and 1 provide some cheap numbers to the Empire that can still get some decent damage through, and Sigmar's Sons and the Tattersouls add an unbreakable element that can go toe-to-toe with Slayers very easily. The 2 units of Greatswords will have the best damage output against the bulk of any Dwarf army, and the 2 units of Demigryph Knights can do a significant amount of damage against the infantry-only Dwarf army. Finally, 2 Outriders come in and get some ranged support that is able to keep a distance from the Dwarf army with extreme ease. The Dwarfs themselves come in with a Rune Lord in command, alongside 2 Runesmiths for some great rune support. A unit of Dwarf Warriors provides some extra bulk to the army, and the 3 units of Longbeards and the 2 units of Longbeards with great weapons will do well against most Empire infantry units. The Dragonback Slayers are great against large units charging in towards ranged support and artillery that consists of 2 units of Thunderers, 2 units of Iron Drakes, and the Goblobbers. Alright, as always, we're going to start with a conversation about deployment, and both armies trying something just a little bit funky here today. First things first, the Empire has a standard front line, more or less. They've got the Greatswords, the Tattersouls, the Greatswords forming the central sort of strength. They've got Sigmar's Sons up to the front just by a little bit. Halberdiers on either flank, not really scared, obviously, of any incoming cavalry, but able to come in from the flanks, the rears, the sides of the Dwarf enemy. Meanwhile, we have a little bit of Vanguard deployment going on. We do have the Outriders up front in the woods, hiding their advanced placement so that if the Dwarf does decide to get aggressive, they're able to open fire early on, or alternatively, they can push forward through the woods, of course. Meanwhile, we have the Amber Wizard over here, Boris Todbringer flying up in the air over here, and then on either side of this little hill, we've got the Demigryph Knights, and they are hidden because of the terrain. Forest unnecessary. They are hidden because there are no Dwarf units off on these sides, so they are able to come in from the flank. So a little bit of, again, cheekiness there. And you'll see as this Flock of Doom goes down to start the battle off, the deployment on the Dwarf side. We've got a front line consisting of these long beards, of course, right across the front. The Runesmith filling in the gaps there, trying to provide some rune support, of course. And then we have the Rune Lord back here as well, providing more rune support to the bulk of this army, trying to ruin Onion Ease's day. Please forgive me. Then we've got the Thunderers back here, the Iron Drakes with their shorter range a little bit further up in these gaps, able to fire through the gaps here. The Thunderer is able to fire through these gaps over here. Then all the way off to the side, we have the Longbeards with great weapons. Of course, they do have charge defense against large, so they are able to hold back any incoming cavalry, able to sort of shift their placement if something has to come up from over here, or if something rather ends up coming up from here. So overall decent deployment, and then all the way back here, this is where the cheek comes in. We've got the Dragonback Slayers hidden in the woods back here, again, able to dive in and provide any defensive support if necessary. And then over here, we've got a unit of Dwarf Warriors, again, able to dive in and provide support. Not as much as a unit of Slayers would, but still, the thinking is quite strong. Now, the Goblobbers obviously back here, opening fire instantaneously, and good targeting, I have to say. They're firing on the Tattersouls, and it's a good call mainly because these guys are unbreakable, so to try and damage them or Sigmar's Sons if the shots were to miss early on, good call because they will fight to the death. Unfortunately, though, the Goblobber has the Discourage ability with its missile damage, so sort of losing out on that leadership damage. Obviously, it doesn't matter this early on in the fight, but I question if it might have been better off just going with a regular Grudge Thrower rather than a Goblobber. Just something to think about. But as the battle progresses, you'll see the Tattersouls do take a decent amount of damage. Amber Wizard and Boris staying behind, as on either side we've got the Demigryph Knights pushing forward, of course, and of course the bulk of the army pushing forward as well. The Outriders pulling forward to try and get a little bit of early damage in. These Outriders as well, getting some early shots in. Another Flock of Doom does go down, just causing a little bit of damage. You'll see these guys trying to get out of the way, but a decent amount of damage does go through. Meanwhile, the Outriders on the side over here on the left are opening fire, trying to damage some of these Longbeards with great weapons as well. And finally, the Demigryph Knights have been revealed. These guys are going to dive right into the Longbeards. These guys sort of taking a longer route, taking the scenic route, going around, and then coming in from the sides and the rears. They're able to, of course, take care of the Thunderers and shut down ranged support. Now, this charge here is a bit of a bad call for one simple reason. Longbeards with great weapons have charge defense against large, so the entirety of that charge bonus has been negated, so a bit of a useless charge there, unfortunately. Meanwhile, as the lines do get closer, you'll see that unit does get a decent sort of charge from the rear angle, a lot more damage done there on that initial charge, and right away these Slayers are responding. They're pushing in towards these Demigryph Knights, and these Demigryph Knights, seeing that threat coming in, decide to disengage right away and pull away. Again, as these front lines are pushing in, you'll see a lot of fire being thrown around, trying to get a lot of damage done. The Tattersouls have been taken down to less than 50% of their health before they're even able to engage, and same goes for the Sigmar's Sons as well. Rune of Wrath and Ruin earlier on was doing a lot of work as well, and right now we of course have the Rune of Negation providing some damage resistance here to make sure that the dwarf lines hold on for as long as possible. Meanwhile, over here, these Demigryph Knights, after having caused a little bit of damage to the Longbeards, disengaging, trying to come in for a cycle charge. Of course, they are anti-infantry, they're shock cavalry, so they need to be kept cycle charging, so good move there. And meanwhile, Boris, as you saw, came flying in to hit these Thunderers and shut down that ranged fire. Meanwhile, back here, these Iron Drakes continue to open fire, probably at the Tattersouls here, and same from these Iron Drakes back here, trying to get some shots in, and you'll see another Rune of Negation go down, just to try and keep these Longbeards and these Longbeards intact and active. A little bit of overlapping going on. Some better Rune Lord placement, or rather some better Rune Smith placement may have done a better job of covering more of the army, maybe provide some support back here as well as over here, but right now this center is going to be extremely strong. You'll notice as well these Thunderers are opening fire at these Outriders and doing a lot of work trying to shut these guys down. Meanwhile, over here, these Outriders sort of having a field day, able to open shots off at whoever they so choose. I believe they're targeting the Longbeards right now, so getting a decent amount of damage through, and unfortunately these Thunderers have been bogged down, so they're not able to respond and try and finish these Outriders off. So very opposite sort of developments at either flank. Meanwhile, over here, these Demigryph Knights continue to be chased by the Dragonback Slayers, and these Outriders opening fire on these Slayers. They are unarmored. They do have their whirling axes to try and provide some defense against incoming ranged fire, but they have their backs turned to the Outriders, so ranged fire coming in, and meanwhile also eating some from the Thunderers themselves. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see we have another Flock of Doom going down to try and cause as much damage as possible, and another Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, causing a lot of damage to both the Tattersouls as well as Sigmar's Sons. And great call there, using both the Rune and the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin against these unbreakable units to cause a lot of damage. So great play there. Meanwhile, over here, these Demigryph Knights continue their cycle charge, come back in, and we'll go back to full speed finally. You'll see over here these Demigryph Knights are being chased by these Slayers. They're sort of trying to find their way out of that trap, trying to get away from these Slayers, and these guys just taken care of. Not much of a chance there. The Outriders shot out by the Thunderers. Meanwhile, these Thunderers have been taken care of as well. These Halberdiers here able to push in and shut down that range fire, allowing, of course, Boris to be free. Now over here, another Rune of Negation does go down. This time the Master Rune of Negation able to provide more strength to the center. These Great Swords otherwise doing a lot of work to the Longbeards, just pushing them back. And of course, with the Demigryph Knights coming in from the rear as well, a lot of work getting done. Meanwhile, we have the Iron Drakes opening fire into these Halberdiers as they try to hold these Longbeards in place. And these Demigryph Knights now do something a little cheeky, very clever, I must say. They pull in, they turn around, they get a rear charge on these Longbeards. Great charge in there, a lot of damage. Of course, charge defense doesn't work when you're engaged in melee and it's the chargers coming in from the rear. Unfortunately, they stay in there. If the Demigryph Knights had pushed through, these Slayers would get caught out. So what you'll see right now is that these Demigryph Knights, they stay in there, they fight these Longbeards until they shatter, and then they pull away. So good thinking there. Could have done it a bit more smoothly, but great thinking there. And now the Slayers are trapped with the Halberdiers, and they have to deal with that nonsense. So good move. Meanwhile, Boris is still up in the air here. Could have sent him in, diving against somebody. Sort of indecision there, going down and up and down again. Get a decent sort of rear-ish charge against these guys, causing them to break. Another Flock of Doom earlier had been causing some damage as well. And meanwhile, another Rune of Negation, just trying to keep these guys alive. Meanwhile, the Demigryph Knights come through from the front here, throw these Longbeards around, stop these Iron Drakes from getting free and able to fire. And over here, unfortunately, the Halberdiers very quickly being taken care of by these Dragonback Slayers, and the Thunderer Fire not doing them any favors, of course. They're being taken care of very quickly. However, they did just save a unit of Demigryph Knights, so well used. And these Demigryph Knights now under the influence of the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, causing a lot of damage to them as well. Great rune usage, I have to take a second to say. Great use of those Runesmiths and the Rune Lord to make sure damage negation is almost constantly active where it matters, and using the Rune of Wrath and Ruin to keep murdering Empire units that would otherwise be hard to kill. You'll see the Tatter Souls are, well, taken care of. Sigmar's Sons are largely taken care of, have very little health left because they were focused down on with those runes, and now the next target is evidently the Demigryph Knights over here, so they've been eating a lot of damage as well. So great rune management. Unfortunately, on the flip side, not the best targeting and taking care of enemy ranged units. These Outriders, just look at the difference here. These Outriders, largely taken care of, not a threat anymore. These guys, almost alive and at full health nearly, until they have depleted their ammunition. So it really goes to show that the Dwarfs weren't considering these guys as a decent enough threat to deal with. A little unfortunate there. Meanwhile, over here on this right flank, these Halberdiers have routed, they have given up, so they're on their way out, and these Dragonback Slayers are now pushing in this way. Unfortunately, these Thunderers have been taken care of, as have these Longbeards. They have completely shattered. The Thunderers at least stand a chance of coming back, and these Demigryph Knights as well engaged in this central conflict. Boris as well, able to cause a lot of damage. The Goblobber has been shut down for a while now, not able to get any of that discourageability through. Boris dives in, doing a lot of damage, shutting down those Runesmiths and the Rune Lord, of course, very important because that rune support is causing a lot of damage. Again, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin trying to shut down these great swords, the real threat, or among the real threats, and now Boris turns down here, and you'll see, takes care of the Longbeards just as they finish off Sigmar's Sons. Again, the Longbeards as well, sort of wavering, low on morale, but for some reason Boris decides not to stay engaged. Not a good call there. Should have just capped them off. Instead decides to take to the air, and I think goes after the Iron Drakes here, dives in, gets them to shatter. Meanwhile, these Demigryph Knights do get sent in against these Thunderers to shut them down once and for all, so good call there. And the Outriders, still alive, able to open fire now at the Slayers, do a little bit of damage, and they've used up all of their ammunition. Boris now over here trying to provide some support to the Demigryph Knights and the Great Swords in this mess over here, and meanwhile, the Master Rune of Negation does go down, providing a plus 44% damage resistance, which is absolutely massive. Now that these Outriders are out of ammunition, though, these Outriders are able to come in from the rear and open some shots off, get some decent damage in there, and we do have another Flock of Doom go down as well, just to trickle in some extra damage. Not a bad call at all. The Amber Wizard over here using, Arcane Conduit and Flock of Doom to decent effect against the Dwarfs. You'll see a lot of shatters going down in the meanwhile. These Demigryph Knights basically shattered those Thunderers. They're on their way out. This unit of Demigryph Knights chasing these Longbeards away. Meanwhile, the Amber Wizard has given up on this side of the field, and a couple of more shatters. These Dwarf Warriors have given up. These Thunderers have given up. These guys are now returning to the fray, but of course, Boris here has something to say about that. These Iron Drakes get hit pretty hard. Meanwhile, you'll see these Demigryph Knights, again, the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, causing a decent amount of damage, and before these guys can dive in, the Slayers do get sent in to respawn, and they have to pull away, but still suffering a decent amount of damage, you'll see, because of that Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Meanwhile, Boris has shut down the Iron Drakes more or less, and he's giving chase to these Thunderers. Now, good call. You want to make sure, and I've said this countless times, you want to make sure that enemy ranged units are driven off the field, because if they come back, they can fire at you from a distance, and obviously they're ranged units, and that can be very problematic, especially to morale. Now, you'll see the Dwarf army is actually retreating into the woods here. Good move there, and for a couple of reasons, the main one being the bulk of the threatening units that the Empire now fields are melee cavalry units, or melee large units. These Outriders over here, they're out of ammunition, so they're basically melee, well, they're literally melee units now. These Outriders, they still have some ammo, but relatively small contingent now, so they don't have too much of a threat to provide, but otherwise it's all these Demigryph Knights and Boris Todbringer himself, so staying in the woods is a good call. These Iron Drakes do poke out just a little bit, giving chase to Boris Todbringer, trying to get some hurt in, and you'll see these Outriders immediately go in to respond, and before that even, Boris is being sent in as well. Meanwhile, another Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Now on these Outriders, not the best call. That's maybe the first time the Rune was poorly targeted, but you'll see here, these Iron Drakes get tossed aside by Boris. These Dragonback Slayers go flying in to try and provide some support, but Boris, of course, after dropping a few Dwarfs from the air, decides to disengage and take to the air. Now again, that Rune of Wrath and Ruin was a little bit wasted on these Outriders, because these guys wouldn't last a day in melee. Should have saved that for some of these Demigryph Knights instead, so just that first misuse of the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and there you have it. Boris takes to the air. Meanwhile, these Outriders opening fire on these Dragonback Slayers really should have pulled back, and as these two Demigryph Knights come in, you'll see another Rune of Wrath and Ruin does go down now on the Demigryph Knights, trying to take care of these guys, and you'll see of course, damage reduction as well, damage negation rather, through the Rune of Negation. Boris, meanwhile, coming in to respond to this as well as these Demigryph Knights leave, and these guys are disengaged as well. Boris comes in and just trying to, I think, take care of the runesmiths, which is a good call because like magical support, rune support can make a huge difference. So the Demigryph Knights coming in as well, trying to shut this down, and you'll see these Slayers now being sent in to try and take care of this. What was originally a good idea, sort of camping out in these woods here, you know, taking the benefit of the trees to make sure that enemy cavalry isn't as effective, has now sort of gone sideways because the army has been split apart. The Slayers and the Longbeards are over here, and you've got the unit of Longbeards here alongside the Runesmiths and the Rune Lords, so that split is certainly not helpful. Being outside of the trees is certainly not helpful, and you'll see another Flock of Doom does go down, causing just a little bit of damage before these guys get out of its radius, but, you know, good use of magic there. Should have locked it down on one of these units, and you'll see over here these units are starting to fall apart. The Empire is having a hard time holding the ground. These Demigryph Knights have given up. They're on their way out, and again, another Rune of Wrath and Ruin, just causing a lot of hurt there, even when not engaged. But you'll see these Outriders now decide it's time to go diving in, just to try and hold these guys in place, and another Rune of Wrath and Ruin. But of course, these Outriders are very quickly taken care of. Meanwhile, these Iron Drakes opening fire on these Halberdiers, scaring them off, while Boris takes to the air once more. Outriders preventing these guys from firing, making sure the Iron Drakes don't get too many shots off. And then Boris does fly in, come in to try and finish them off, of course. Now, these Outriders taken care of very quickly, naturally, and these guys still stand a chance. If the Dragonback Slayers can get a decent surround on Boris, and if the Runesmiths can keep that damage reduction up, Boris can be very quickly taken care of. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see the Demigryph Knights oh so low on health, but still getting some work done, tossing these Longbeards around, making sure they do not come back. And meanwhile, Boris is sort of trying to keep himself engaged, but also safe. They're in the water now, and that's a really good move. I'm not entirely certain if that was intentional or a mistake, but great move, pulling the dwarf units into the shallow water here, because of course, just like forests are bad for large units, shallow water is bad for infantry or small units. No sort of extra pun intended there or anything, but Boris does pull away and try to take to the air as this Rune of Negation goes down, and these Demigryph Knights extremely scared. They are sort of retreating. They're willing to fight a little bit, but Onionies decides to keep them unengaged, and that's a good call. It's really up to the Dwarf player now to go chasing after the Empire, because they've got this unit of Outriders that's routing, and those guys are taken care of. They're not coming back. And then there's this unit of Demigryph Knights, and they're still a bit of a threat in one simple way. They're a ground unit, and the only other thing that the Empire has left is Boris, and despite that Rune of Wrath and Ruin that you just saw go down, causing a little bit of damage, he has a lot of health, and with these two ground units, this one obviously off the field, but with this ground unit as support, he's not going to give up the battlefield. And you'll see now, you may have noticed, the Demigryph Knights are hidden, so now the Dwarfs don't even know where they are. So Boris is now picking away at this Dwarven army, and he's sort of tossing the Runesmiths around first, and that's a good idea. You want to try and get rid of that support, because of course, with the Rune of Negation providing support, the Rune of Wrath and Ruin providing, you know, offensive support, Boris can be taken down. And you'll see Boris now capped out more or less on his regenerative capabilities. The Midland Rune Fang isn't able to heal him much further, so now the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin is causing a lot more trouble. Again, diving back in, needing to take care of these guys ASAP, and really the Dwarf player should have been, well, earlier he should have been sort of chasing after these Demigryph Knights. Now that they're hidden, he doesn't even know where that threat remains, but he should have been pushing in to explore or pull back into these woods, because again, the woods are where you're safest as an infantry unit, especially against a large unit. Instead, they're fighting on shallow water, maybe not realizing the further implications of being in that shallow water. Boris, meanwhile, having a field day, sort of flying around, probably scaring these dwarves, except for the Slayers. The Slayers aren't afraid. They are unbreakable. But again, just diving in there, tossing the Rune Lord around, getting a decent amount of damage. Another Rune of Wrath and Ruin causing, you know, more decent damage to Boris, and now that he can't regenerate health, it is quite frightening. He takes to the air once more, just trying to keep himself alive, and you'll see this Runesmith drops the Rune of Negation, reducing that damage intake. Good move as well. I don't know if this was intentional, but sort of waiting until the Rune of Negation lives on for a little while before diving in, and actually diving in on the Runesmith himself, doing a lot of damage, tossing him about. Just great targeting there, making sure that those runes don't keep coming back to haunt Boris here. And meanwhile, you'll see these Demigryph Knights still very frightened. They could actually shatter at any moment, so you can't keep Boris disengaged for too long. They have to be taken care of very quickly, the Dwarfs, and again, diving in, throwing the Rune Lord back, and just getting engaged by these Dragonback Slayers. Off to the air he goes, trying to make sure that he doesn't get bogged down and slaughtered. And we're just going to speed it up a little bit here as Boris keeps flying around and picking away at the Dwarf army to the air and back to the ground, and these guys finally get the memo. They're trying to get back into the woods here, trying to get back into some safety, but really it is far too little, far too late at this point. These guys have taken a lot of damage, and now Boris keeps punching through, keeps flying in, and you'll see these guys eating a lot of damage. The warriors here, the Longbeards rather, willing to give up now, sort of wavering, shaking in their boots. The Slayers, of course, being Slayers, are unbreakable, but apart from that, Boris is just having a good time. He's joining the picnic here, but not how you'd want him to, causing a lot of damage. And even the Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the Slayers here not able to do enough damage to Boris. He's able to stay alive, and you'll see the Rune Lord and the Longbeards shatter. The Slayers try their best, but of course, it's a Pyrrhic victory for the Empire. Now, the Dwarves made great use of runes in this battle, allowing units to survive for much longer and causing a tremendous amount of damage using the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. I thought it was absolutely amazing to see that great usage. Unfortunately, though, the inability to shut down cavalry was damning. As always, guys, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content and keep sending in those battle replays. I think it is one of the best ways to learn, and it's nice to see some great battles coming in from the community, especially when it's from a competitive level, such as the ESL 1v1 tournament. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield.